Well, hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome back to those of you that are long-time listeners, and welcome to those of you that are new listeners as a result of my various training things that I've been doing over the last couple of months. I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode and my next episode with you. And this might be the first time you've heard me interview someone. So I hope you enjoy in advance. I'm just hoping that you enjoy my interview style and enjoy the conversations that I have with my guests. This one is a doozy. I have been so looking forward to bringing you this pair of episodes. For those of you that are new to the podcast, just to give you a heads up, I am not somebody that puts out episodes that are like an hour long. I love the fact that there's people out there that can get through an hour podcast episode in one sitting. But I know for me, I'm usually juggling multiple things. I might be driving or doing some cooking or some housework. And I just find that if I can keep my episodes, I like to listen to episodes that are around 30 to 35 minutes max. So you will see as you listen to my podcast that I usually will take my interviews and put them into 2 back-to-back episodes. And that's because I want to just be delivering content that you can actually digest in one sitting. And so having the episodes drop one after another and having them as a pair, I find works for me, and I hope it works for you. This interview pair is with an absolute gem of an executive assistant. Her name is Doriette McIvor Stone. And I first came across Doriette when she was featured on the Admin Spotlight blog post that my friend Candice does over at Admin Avenues. Now, I will put a link in the show notes to the interview, the Q&A that Candice did with Doriette, for you to go and read about Doriette and her responses to the questions that Candice posed. But when I read that post, I just knew that she would be a fascinating person to have on the podcast. So Doriette McIvor Stone is an Australian executive assistant. She is currently the executive assistant to the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee. And she is somebody that has been an EA at CEO level for over 20 years. And look, I just absolutely adore her. I cannot speak highly enough of her. If you go to her LinkedIn profile, which I will share the link to in the show notes because that's a great way to connect with her. She says that she was, prior to being an EA, she was a store manager and even purchased, managed and successfully sold an events company for singles, I might add. She is somebody who is an absolutely skillful and dedicated C-suite executive assistant. And her LinkedIn profile speaks to that high level of proficiency in both the hard skills and the power skills that make someone what I describe as a linchpin assistant, and Doriette is one of those people. She was an absolute delight to interview. I could have talked to her for days and days, but the truth is that we actually had a really hard time making our interview time work because she is so responsive and so busy in her role as executive assistant to the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee that we had to postpone and reschedule a number of times. And even when we actually did the interview, we actually had to cut it short because she had something come up. So we actually got back on Zoom the next day and recorded our second interview piece, and I have woven that all together into what I hope you will enjoy as a listening experience. So I loved talking to Doriette. I loved hearing her experiences of both her observations of what makes her somebody that has high value and is highly valuable as an executive assistant, but also I loved hearing her observations of the way the skills and capabilities that she was able to transfer from her fascinating journey navigating the career spider frame. As you know, that's what I use to talk about your experience on the career ladder. So, with no further ado, I'm really delighted to bring you part 1 of my interview with Doriette, and you can look forward to part 2 dropping next week. So, enjoy the episodes. Thank you so much for joining me on Being Indispensable. My name's Liz Van Vliet. We're all dispensable. I know that better than anyone. I'm a breast cancer survivor. But that doesn't mean that we can't invest in ourselves to improve the skills and capabilities that are going to help us stand out and be perceived as indispensable. Indispensable is also about the being side of the equation. Because if we're not looking after ourselves and our own well-being, then we have no hope of showing up as indispensable in the workplace. Well, Doriette McIvor Stone, it is so lovely. In fact, I will go further than that. I will say it is an absolute delight to have you on the Assist with Impact podcast.
Oh, Liz, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you.
That is so lovely to hear. Listeners will have heard in the intro how much I have been looking forward to interviewing you, and it has been like getting a booking at a restaurant that you have been wanting to go to for a long time. I feel like that's what I've gotten. I have finally gotten my restaurant booking at the restaurant that I have been dying to get a restaurant booking at. So I feel very lucky. I feel like I'm having the degustation menu. So now
I hope so, and I hope they don't sit you near the toilets.
You would never do that. I know you would never do that. So, you know that the very first question I'm going to ask you out of the gate is for my lovely listeners. They are going to be dying now. They are going to literally be salivating to continue our little, little theme of dining. They are going to be salivating to hear you tell me some of the stories of how you became an EA. But as they know from listening to the podcast, I love to talk about the idea that we don't climb a career ladder. That is such a boring way to think about our lives and our careers. I much prefer to think about the idea of climbing a spider frame in a children's playground. And I know that you have such an interesting story and you have made so many amazing moves. But for our listeners, would you mind sharing some of those moves and tell them about your experience navigating the career spider frame, how you started, where you moved, and how you've reached where you are now?
Okay, so there's basically 2 chapters to that. So I'm going to totally skip the first chapter because it has absolutely nothing to do with being an EA.
Okay.
But I had basically travelled overseas for about 10 years, and 5 years of that time I was actually married to a CEO in Malaysia. So I actually didn't work for that 5 years. And I was an expat wife. We were living in KL. And sadly, things didn't work out. And so I came back to Australia with basically a big chunk of time that didn't have a lot going on in there. Okay, so I travelled and I worked overseas, and I had, you know, little jobs here and there, but no big career moves in London or in Vancouver or in Malaysia. So I actually ended up getting a job as an events manager for a catering company in Vaucluse. And the reason I believe I got that job is because when I was living in KL, I did a lot of events for the Australian expats, including I was president of the Australian Wine Society. So that just put me, and I was actually in just the right place at the right time. I'd arrived in Australia. It had been a long time, and I basically needed a job, and I needed a job quickly. I had a lot of friends in hospitality, and this particular lady, I arrived in December. She had events all over Sydney for Christmas, you know, corporate parties, and she just needed wait staff. And away I went. So after 3 waitressing jobs, she sat me down and she said, "Tell me about you. You know, there's more to you than what meets the eye." And by the end of the 3rd gig, she'd asked me to be her event manager for this catering company in Vaucluse. I worked there happily and successfully for 2 years. And one of our clients there was Mortgage Choice. And we used to do their board meetings. And they were seated and they were catered. And I did one, and they asked for me every time. So I would just go in and do that. And by the end of a number of months, the directors asked me to join the company as an EA. So once again, it had nothing really to do with skill. It was just absolute luck. And I was there for 7 years.
Okay. That is, do you know what I find really interesting, Doriette, is that you have just the words that came out of your mouth it had absolutely nothing to do with skill, and it just had to do with luck. But what I heard was networking and interpersonal skills. And whilst I'm sure that there was an element of luck involved, I feel like you are, you know, I've been the first person that's ever said to you that you are not giving yourself enough credit for obvious skill and capability.
Well, I'm certainly an opportunist. There's no doubt about it. And in nearly every opportunity that's come my way, I've grabbed it. I can basically smell an opportunity from a mile away. And if I want it, I will definitely get it.
Okay. So you joined Mortgage Choice as an EA, and who were you supporting at
the National Sales Manager?
Okay. All right. And so tell me what that then led to from there.
Well, that was a great start for me because it allowed me to use all the sales skills that I've had in various other roles in the past, as well as my, you know, EA or, you know, assistant skills. So I really liked the gentleman I was working for, and I really loved the company. And I worked for the National Sales Manager for about a year, I believe. And then I really wanted to work for the COO. I was determined to work for him. But he had an EA that he had had for many years. So I remember going to bed at night and just saying, "Oh, I wish she would leave. Oh, I wish she would leave." And after 6 weeks, she did. And I couldn't believe my luck. And so I just knocked on his door and I said, "I've heard that your EA is leaving, and I really want to work for you." And I worked for him for about 6 years.
Wow.
5 or 6 years, I would say.
So that, again, I love that. So listeners, I hope you are taking note of the fact that, Doriette, you are clearly, like, you use the word opportunist, but what I love is that you have obviously got this ability to advocate for yourself. And that's something that I talk a lot about in my training and coaching as such an important skill, such an important power skill to have. So that's fantastic to hear you really describing how you've been able to do that and how it's paid off for you.
make yourself known. You have to be noticed. I don't believe you can just sit there and think things are going to come to you. You really need to make an effort and also know what you want. And I've been lucky that every time I have, put myself out there, it has worked out. But also to also know that if you've made the wrong choice, to move out quickly, because it's not going to do you any favours.
Yeah. Tell me about one of those times.
Well, one of them would be more around just not the right industry. I worked for an insurance company for a while as an EA, and it had all the, the joys of being an EA, but the industry really wasn't for me. And I knew that. And so I started to look elsewhere because I knew that the industry couldn't change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me, let's circle back to what you loved about, like, when you became an EA, did you love the role from the get-go?
I loved being able to make other people's days easy and structured.
Yeah.
That's what I really enjoy. And nothing makes me happier than going home in the evening and looking back on the day and thinking those things that I did made that day work. I love a plan that comes together. And I'd like to know that I've actually had an input into that.
Yeah. So in terms of, so I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in the sense that, you came to the role of EA having never done the role before. And so did I when I did the role for a little while, but I didn't stay in the role for clearly as long as you have. When you stepped into the role, how quickly did you adapt to the hard skills side of things?
That was easy. I outsourced it. So I've never been the Excel queen or the PowerPoint queen. In fact, I've never done a secretarial course. None of those standard things. But I don't waste my time on the things that I know are not going. It doesn't make a difference whether I do the Excel spreadsheet or whether I ask someone else to do it for me. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm better off just going to finance, like going as far as I can, going to finance and saying, this is your gig. Can you just da-da-da-da-da. I don't present it as my own work. I always say, is this what you're after? I've had finance help me. But I could spend days trying to work it out. And while I'm doing that, I'm missing all the cues around me. I'm not doing the things that I'm really good at. And I think, it's all about what they're saying now as an EA, you need to be, an IT specialist and of this and of that. And I don't necessarily agree with that because it took me, this Zoom call was, an absolute example. We had an issue at the beginning. You and I could have worked on that for half an hour. Or I just left the room, found someone that could help me, and it was fixed in 3 minutes. So we could just move on. That person is okay with helping. They feel good about it. You engaging with people, and they actually quite like that you ask for assistance. And I just walk out of the room and find someone. And luckily for me, I can always find the right person.
I think the other thing you do really beautifully, because I've just watched you do it, is you're so gracious in the way you do it, and you make that other person actually feel good about the fact that you've asked them for them to be actually able to, in being able to assist you. You did it in such a lovely way, listeners, I can attest to this, that it was actually really lovely. You actually made that person feel really good about assisting you. And so many people don't do that. They actually feel like you're actually draining them. And that I think is a really important distinction. When you are going to call on somebody for support or assistance, do it in the way you're doing it, rather than the way you see so many people doing it, which is where you're just being a drain on that other person, and then you're not actually giving them anything back in return. You did that so beautifully.
Well, thank you. But also too, it also makes you approachable as well. So the next time they need something, they don't feel like they can't approach you and ask for assistance or advice. So it just becomes a two-way street. And I don't want to be that EA which sits in their little corner and doesn't get involved with what's going on around them, because I work instinctively. That's how I pick up on the cues that there's an issue over there, or someone's not well, or there's something going on, because that's just as important as the day-to-day, work skills. So, we're a small office here. There's only 45, 50 of us in this room. It's not that EA to the CEO where you're in the, in the corner office and, you only come out to make a cup of tea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I love the fact that what you've just described there is something I talk about in my training, and I've talked about on the podcast. It's something called reciprocity. And you've just described it so beautiful. It's that idea that, well, of course this is what we do for each other, because this is the way that good team members work with each other. So well done. It's fantastic. Thank you. It's so wonderful, because I knew that you'd be demonstrating all of these wonderful attributes. It's so great.
Well, it doesn't, I'm not that traditional EA. I never have been. And I don't want, I keep hearing all the things we need to do. And it's not that I'm not open to change, because I certainly am. But I know what I do works. Well, it's certainly worked in the roles that I've had to date. I can't honestly say that it would work perhaps in another 10 years' time, but it's still working for me. But it's not something new. It's something you can develop, but it does come naturally. So I am quite fortunate.
Yeah, but I find that so interesting that you see yourself as a non-traditional EA, whereas I see you as what I describe as a linchpin assistant, because you're being effective, not just efficient, because, efficiency is not the be all and end all in my training and coaching. You can have an assistant that is the master or the mistress of the Excel spreadsheet and the PowerPoint and the calendar and the inbox, and yet is nowhere near as effective as you are in terms of interpersonal relationships and managing and influencing people the way you clearly are. So, yeah, I think that's, that looking at it through my eyes, I know my listeners will be thinking the same thing. It's like they would be aspiring to be more like you than more like those, what you see as the more traditional EA. And I think that's more more what you are is higher, has more career currency, as I describe it. And listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes to the wonderful blog on the Admin Avenues website that I first read about Doriette in. So Doriette, you're now in your role, you were describing the office that you're in now, where you are. Tell us about who you're supporting at the moment, and who I'm very conscious of the fact that you may need to jump off this interview to go and make sure he gets onto his meeting. Tell me who you're supporting.
Okay, so I work for the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee, and I've been here now for just over 3 years. So basically, we work in a 4-year quad, because we have Olympics every 4 years, but just keep in mind that we also have the Winter Olympics every 2, but it's still 4 years. So 4 years for the summer and 4 years for the winter. And our job is to ensure that the Olympians can compete at their highest level and do the very, very best that they can, and to keep them safe, to take them there and to bring them back. Of course, there's more to it than what meets the eye, but it is, for me, about the athletes.
Yeah. And so, yes, I'm also thinking that in terms of complexity for you, I'm thinking that there's so many stakeholders that you would have to be managing in your role that you would have to have awareness of and be, having awareness of for your executive that need to be sort of taken into account for calendar and meetings and, managing priorities and various other things. Would that be right?
Absolutely, because we have what we call the National Federation. So they're all the sports that compete at the Olympics, and they have their own team, as in their own administrative team, their own CEOs, high performance coaches, COOs. So again, it's managing my influence, and we also, of course, deal with Australian politics and politicians, and so it's a matter of actually managing through communication and influence rather than that traditional, management team. We do, of course, have a management team, just like everyone else. We have a people and culture manager and a promotions and communications manager, etc. So we still have that, but it is definitely about the outside.
So I'm fascinated to know, one of the things I was doing, because I loved reading this interview that you did with Candice from Admin Avenues. And one of the things that you said in there was when Candice asked you, what's your admin superpower? And your response was my instinctiveness and my emotional intelligence. And you said, without doubt, they've saved me from sticky situations every single time. These two things cannot be taught, but you can tap into them. And by doing so, they will develop. So I would love you to talk to that point and talk to me and the listeners about how those two things, like what you mean by instinctiveness and when you talk about emotional intelligence, what you're talking about, and how has that helped you as an EA? Can you give us an example of a situation?
Okay, I certainly will think of one, but basically it's reading the cues and actually watching people's the words that they use, but also reading their body language as well. It's also instinctively, when you ask a question, say you're running an event and you ask someone, have we done this? I always know if it hasn't been done correctly, because it mainly the way that they answer. And some people are very good at giving you the correct answer, but deep down you just know that maybe it's not quite the right answer that you require. So it's just more trial and error. I'm lucky because I was gifted that, actually. And as a family, we all have been, including my mother and my sisters, very well connected with people. But I do believe it can be developed.
So what you're describing there, Doriette, which I love for the listeners to hear, is that you're describing that you're paying attention to the nonverbal communication, and then you're observing and you're noticing, which is something I talk a lot about, and you're then asking questions, and you're not just assuming. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. And it's very rare that I'm wrong on that front. You just get a feeling that something is not quite right. It may not be with the event, it might be with the person. You could be talking to them for a minute and you think there's something not right today. And I know we all talk about, are you okay? But I think I don't ask that question willy-nilly. I always have a feeling, very rarely wrong.
And it's the way you ask that question. I think that's when you talk about emotional intelligence, it's the fact that you're using your emotional intelligence in the way you ask that question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's, people sometimes see it as a little bit of witchcraft. I do believe that is definitely a gift, but it is just being mindful and being aware. And again, I know the mindful word is very, very well used at the moment, possibly overused, but you can pick up on those cues really quickly, and they're imperative in our role.
No, I think that mindfulness word, as it applies to EAs, can't be overstated in some ways, because that idea that like I was reading something the other day that said that EAs have an unspoken KPI that's perfection. Well, I think that's just unrealistic, but B, if you do aspire to be able to set that bar so high for yourself, your radar always has to be on, and you have to have that awareness of what's going on for other people, so that you're there, you can catch those balls when other people are in danger of dropping their balls. Would that be right?
Absolutely. And you asked for a couple of examples. The best one is when you walk into the office and you just know that your CEO needs a day. He just needs a day for himself. You may not even be fully aware of what workload he's got, because there's things coming from everywhere, but you can just see it in his eyes that he needs time to focus. And so you just make that happen around him. That's normally, really, I never say anything or ask, but and at the end of it, 99% of the time he goes, oh, what a great day. I got so much done today. I really needed to get those things done. 9 times out of 10, I'm not even aware of what those things were. I know a few, but there's obviously more. And you just make it happen without actually asking.
That is brilliant. That is magic. Wow. And in terms of making that happen, I'm assuming that involves taking things out of his diary, out of his calendar that were in there.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you approach that when you have to say to somebody that meeting that person may have been relying on to get their thing done, I'm bumping you from the CEO's calendar?
Well, I always ask. I just don't move it, and I just have the conversation and just say, look, if I was to move this by 24 hours, is this going to be the end of the world for you? Do you have a deadline? Matt really needs some space today. I'm just honest. And they're like, absolutely. Or I'll say, listen, Matt needs some space today. I know I've allocated an hour. Can you talk fast and knock it over in 30? Okay. And then I'll give him the afternoon that's free. So just offer alternatives in that regard. And I know that that's always really well received.
And what I'm hearing there is that you have established relationships with people, which we talked about in terms of your relationship building, and that you have this ability to build these great relationships. So you've obviously cultivated these relationships so that you can then leverage that relationship to then go and do that ask.
Exactly. So rather than spend hours on that Excel spreadsheet that I've just given to finance, I'm using that time more effectively and building the relationships, because to me, that is the most important thing. And that's why I can get a table in a restaurant where it's been booked out for weeks. And that's where I can get people to do things that wouldn't normally even be on their radar. And the favours, like when you're at an event and you're running around, trying to do things, and you've suddenly really realised that the flowers aren't there, and you physically don't have time to go out and buy them, or you get a call to say they've been delivered to the wrong address, or the tablecloth, or something that's happened. I can just ask anyone, the event manager of the venue, and just say, can you please get someone to do that? And that's because I've taken time to do that. Yeah. And because I've worked in events, it normally starts with, I know how difficult your job is. I've been there. I used to do that. So what can I do to help you now? I've got 10 minutes. What can I do? Can I, help you with the tablecloth or whatever? And they understand then that you're also, you're not demanding. You understand what their role is, and then they're more willing to help you. So it's just basically just fostering the relationship and getting it going from the word go.
Yeah. And again, the listeners will know that I use this expression a lot, that we're human beings, we're not human doings.
Absolutely.
And that is, you are that is what you're epitomising in the way, in your approach and in the person that you are. So that's just wonderful. Now,
it's been lost, I think, over that, the big C, as I call it, because I refuse to say the word another time. A lot of that was lost, and I feel that we really need to work hard to get it back. It's really important that the relationships start again, because that's the only way I can get my job done.
thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.